Welcome to the Mac for the Blind Fall 2023 online courses. This is going to be sort of an introduction. So, this is just kind of going over some basics with the Mac, some basics with VoiceOver, just things you should know, things that you should be aware of. The other four courses, which I think pretty much most of the people who are here I think have also signed up for, is going to go through the Mac major areas. So file management, working with email, working with documents, and web browsing. Really the four major areas I'm going to try to cover and try to give it to you from the perspective of a VoiceOver user. So let's start at the beginning. So I know obviously the familiar faces, so to speak, in this list have probably already have their Mac and have gone through that whole process, but I'm going to start from scratch here. So in case you are amongst the new folks who are either curious about getting a Mac, maybe you're ready to take the plunge, whatever the case may be, the one thing you have to, understand is what you're getting yourself into. So if you are coming over from Windows, you cannot expect the Mac or VoiceOver to behave like JAWS or NVDA or Dolphin or anything else for that matter. Mac and VoiceOver are two different species entirely. So, I get a lot of times when I work with folks who are coming over from Windows or who are interested in learning Mac to sort of bolster their assistive technology knowledge, they will always go to me, well, in JAWS, in NVDA, and there are parallels. Don't get me wrong. When I teach people who have a Windows background or a familiarity, I do try to find reference points. For example, the Finder is like of course, no, I can't, a File Explorer in Windows. So, there are things that kind of, I will, including keyboard commands, like, for example, insert T in JAWS is similar to the VoiceOver F2 command on the Mac. So I try to kind of find those reference points to help people tie that knowledge together. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of keeping Windows and your Windows screen reader background completely separate from your mindset when you get into the Mac. Don't necessarily expect the process of learning VoiceOver and the Mac to be much simpler for the average person simply because you have 5, 10, 20, 25 years, 30 years, whatever the case may be. I've seen people all over the spectrum as far as how many years of Windows experience they've had. My Windows experience goes back to 1993. I still currently teach Windows in certain circumstances to certain state agencies and my Helen Keller contract. But I've been, a very strong, and I support and believe that the Mac and VoiceOver is a better option in the grand scheme of things. If the job gets done by Windows and that's your only option, then you really have no choice. But if you do have a choice, I've just found as a user, a blind user going, as I said, back to 1993 as a Windows user and an instructor, I can tell you learning the Mac is much easier. The Mac is much more forgiving than a Windows PC in JAWS. JAWS to me, though, of course, it's a powerful screen reader, it gets the job done for people. I think it's become very cumbersome, and I think they really want it to do too many things, and they've forgotten in a lot of ways the fact that a blind person is looking to have a screen reader, not a piece of software that I always jokingly say will someday be able to make you a cup of coffee. That would be nice, but that's not the job of a screen reader. The Mac and Apple, they really try to make VoiceOver be a screen reader. Now, I know some folks may be aware of some of the negativity that is out there. It's been interesting that there's a couple of Apple Viz articles that has been making the rounds. It's all, to me, nonsense. Opinions, everybody is entitled to opinions. Everybody has opinions. As Clint Eastwood once said, and I'm going to water this down. Opinions are like anal orifices. Everybody's got them, and most of them stink. And that's the reality. As I said to somebody privately, I could post 1,000,001 articles about negativity, about Windows, Android, you name it. That's just the nature of the beast. Blind people are no different from sighted people. There is just a percentage of people out there that like to point out the negative about everything. The stuff that I've read in some of these articles is outdated. If you are running Mac OS Sonoma, for example, Safari is not the same as it was in some of the versions of Ventura where people were experiencing problems with Safari, what they call busy signals, meaning that it's not rendering, it's not loading properly with VoiceOver. Also, you got to keep in mind there are other web browsers besides, Safari. So, to me, the point is moot. So with that out of the way, when you get your Mac, you're going to want to set it up. So when the Mac starts up, you are going to get the option to start VoiceOver. If it doesn't come up automatically, you can simply press the Command key and F5, Function key 5 on your keyboard, and you should get the VoiceOver option to have it speak through the setup process. The thing I will say about the setup process is it is completely accessible. The important thing you have to keep in mind is you need to navigate and read the screens and pick your options accordingly. Now, the way you're going to navigate with VoiceOver to keep it very simple is you use either the tab key to go through the setup screens. I guess a better way to do it, though, is use the VoiceOver keys with the arrows, the left or the right arrow. Now, the VoiceOver keys are the VoiceOver modifiers. Just like there is a JAWS modifier key, either your insert key or the caps lock key on the laptop layout, you have two options in the Mac VoiceOver world. You can use the Control and the Option keys held down together, or you can use the caps lock key like you can do in JAWS. And you can kind of alternate back and forth in the beginning because Apple gives you the ability to try them both out, sort of take them both for a test drive and see what you find more comfortable. I am an old school Control and Option key user, and that is how I do it. Because it's just something I've always done, and I feel comfortable with that. I just don't like, I don't even use the caps lock key in JAWS. I have a full size keyboard and just use the insert key. But that's up to the user. If you're comfortable with that, then you use that. And you will have the option when you're running your Mac that VoiceOver can be customized so that only you can customize and make the choice of whether you want to use Control, Option, and Caps Lock. Now, if you're not familiar with a Mac keyboard and you don't know what in the world I'm talking about when I say the Option key, so I'm going to kind of give you a little quick layout. Most people get a laptop keyboard with their Mac, so they're going to get a MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air. If you feel the keyboard and going from left to right at the bottom of the keyboard, you have what is called the FN key is the furthest key on the left corner. Then as you come to the right towards the space bar, you're going to have your Control, your Option, your Command, and then space bar. On the right-hand side, past the space bar, as you continue to the right, you'll have a second Command key and a second Option key. You don't have a second Control key, unfortunately, on a laptop keyboard, which leads me to the recommendation, and I'm stressing the word here, recommendation. You do not have to do this, but I have found over the years using a full-size keyboard that includes the numeric keypad and the right Control key, plus it has the page up, page down, home and end keys as, a regular a PC keyboard might have. But Apple, for example, has the Magic 2 full-size keyboard. I think it's got more advantages in using VoiceOver and makes certain things a little bit easier. But again, I don't like to tell people what they should do. I don't like to make people, so to speak, spend money if they don't necessarily need to. I just find that a full-size keyboard for me over the years has always made the most sense. So, that's the whole idea of the keyboard layout. It is, the keyboard is going to feel pretty much the same as the PC keyboard if you've used one. Other than those terminologies, the command key, which is basically like the alt key on a PC keyboard. I guess the option key on the left-hand side would be like your Windows key, and on the right-hand side, it would be like your applications key, if that makes sense to you.
To
So other
interrupt,
than
John,
that, yeah.
Logitech actually makes a keyboard, full size keyboard, identical to Apple's. The only difference is you're able to pair three devices, and it probably costs probably about $15 less, but it's laid out identical to what you just described. Um, the only difference is that it has a USB toggle that you can plug into your laptop or hub, whichever you choose to use, instead of having to pair it with the Bluetooth keyboard. But when you get into that second and third device, it will have to be Bluetooth. But the keyboard is identical. I'm actually using one right now, and I'm looking at it, and there's exactly like you said, the layout is identical to what Apple makes. It's just made by Logitech. So
Yeah, there are a Logitech is a good brand, and there are a lot of I've run across people using different types of keyboards. I just talk about the Apple because it's the one that's sitting in front of me right now, Magic 2. And I do have a Logitech keyboard as well at home. I just don't have it here with me. But I do like the fact that you can use it with three different devices and just switch over when you need to. All right. So, like I said, going through the setup process, you want to navigate through those screens and read them carefully because sometimes the default options may not be what you want to choose at that moment. For example, or automatically using Siri or using what's called File Vault or choosing to use the sign in with iCloud and stuff like that. There are several screens that you go through from scratch, including setting up your first account. Now, if you're setting up your first account, you just follow the steps. You're going to type your name. What's going to happen is it's going to create what's called a home folder for you, which will be a combination of your first and last name, unless you change that in that setup screen. And then once you get past that, you can transfer your data if you want, or just have the Mac completely set up from scratch. Now, transfer your data can mean you could realistically connect a PC to your Mac and what they call migration assistant, move your stuff from the PC to the Mac. Or again, like I said, you can wait until the computer is completely set up and then you can manually bring stuff over either by, directly connecting or using like a thumb drive or an external drive or something like that. It's really up to you how you would want to, if you wanted to transfer your data over. Some people actually go to the Apple store and they let the Apple people take care of that. I've had a couple of clients recently that simply didn't want to face that as a new Mac user and just ask the Apple people to do that for them. I don't know, as far as cost, I don't know what Apple charges to do that. I don't know if they did it out of, because it's a blind person and they felt it to be something to do. I don't know. So I can't tell you if that would cost you extra money or not. But I've heard people have it done that way. I'm kind of a do-it-yourselfer. I always have done stuff myself. I haven't like gone to Apple to have them set up any of my devices. I'm one of these people that, kind of takes the plunge and tries it on their own. So that's why I'm kind of speaking from experience as far as the setup screens. Now, if you are moving over from an older Mac, you can use Migration Assistant to transfer your data either from that Mac if you have the proper cables, or you can use a Time Machine backup, and connect the drive to your Mac, and you can choose that as a way of pulling in your data, as long as it's not like, because the newer Macs with Sonoma, everything uses what is called the Apple Filing System, APFS. But if you have an older Time Machine backup from a much older version that is still using macOS Extended Journal, I'm not sure how well that that process will go with Migration Assistant if it's too old. You might have to check with Apple to find out, how if there's going to be any issues. Um, I've heard there are, but I could swear that when I got my M1 Mac and I used a time machine backup to move everything from my previous Mac, and that was Mac OS Extended Journal coming to an APFS volume, and everything worked out fine. It's the Mac I'm using right now, actually, here up at my brother's MacBook Pro M1. So, but still, I would just verify that with Apple in case that's a situation you're in. I know there are a lot of Apple users out there who have Macs that are 2014, 2015, 2016, and they may still be running, a few versions back from Sonoma. I've run into people who are still running Catalina, and such. So if that's your situation, just proceed with caution. Now, once you have your Mac set up, you're good to go. Then it's just making your Mac yourself and learn, your own, I should say, and learn and really getting to use VoiceOver. Now, you are going to be offered with VoiceOver in the beginning to go through what is called the Quick Start tutorial. It is a 20 or 22 screen interactive tutorial that sort of takes you through all of the VoiceOver and Mac OS sort of introductory basic material. I highly recommend that users at least attempt to do it. I jokingly tell my clients I work with that I probably am risking death threats because it is not the most, let's just say it's not the most invigorating or exhilarating tutorial to go through. It's kind of boring, and it's, but it gets the job done. Now, you don't have to do it in one sitting. I try to emphasize this to people. You don't have to feel obligated to sit there and do it all one time. You can take breaks from it. Hitting the escape key will get you out of it. And then you can use the VoiceOver help menu, which is Control Option or Caps Lock H. And from the help menu, you can choose to go through the Quick Start tutorial again, and you'll offer to allow you to either pick up where you left off, or you can start from scratch. And then the left or the right arrows by themselves will allow you either to skip forward or skip backwards through the screens. So if you're on an area that you say, oh, I already know how to do this, I'm familiar with this, you can hit the right arrow to go to the next screen, or you can use the left arrow to repeat something if you feel you didn't get it, really understand it the first time around. So it is definitely a useful thing to at least try to get through once. Now, as far as VoiceOver basics go, some things to remember. As I said earlier, the modifiers, deciding whether you want to use Control or Option together, or you want to use your caps lock key. General navigation includes the arrow keys. So in other words, Control Option left, Control Option right, Control Option up, or Control Option down arrows, or obviously caps lock and the arrow keys. That is how I try to discipline or encourage people to think. Now, some people will say, oh, but you can use the arrows or you can use the tab in this situation and that situation. Yes, I am absolutely aware of that. And you will learn as you use your Mac situations in which you can get away with, just like in Windows, for example, in general menu bars for applications, you can use the left or the right or the up and down arrows by themselves to go through the menus. There are instances where the tab key works in a similar fashion to how it works in Windows, but don't count on it everywhere. That's why I try to discipline people into thinking VoiceOver navigation, VoiceOver arrow keys, because it's the safer way to get through your screen, your application interfaces, the screens and stuff you'll be facing. Of course, as you become more experienced and comfortable and you know where you can use the arrows or you know where the tab key works, then it's up to you. It's your computer. You use it whatever way is most comfortable for you. That's the whole thing that, it's just like Windows. You have to kind of learn and grow into using your screen reader. It's something that I say to people all the time who try to make comparisons between the Mac and Windows. I'm kind of done with that. I can't personally, I just can't get involved in those disputes anymore because I use both and I have my own opinions. And as I said earlier, everybody's got opinions. So, but it's just that I always tell people you are only as good with your computer as you are with your screen reader as a blind person. So, in other words, if you've used Windows for 20 years and you're a really solid, comfortable, pretty advanced JAWS user, and you've used a Mac for 2 months with VoiceOver, you can't turn around and tell people that JAWS is better than the Mac or web browsing is easier in Windows than it is on the Mac because you just don't have the experience or the knowledge. Just like JAWS, there are tips and tricks. There are things that you'll learn as you go along using VoiceOver that makes using the Mac easier and easier. There's faster ways, there's corners you can cut, but you got to learn to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. So it is a process to learn how to get comfortable with your Mac and VoiceOver. I call it the 3 Ps when I teach people: patience, practice, and persistence. So you have to be patient through the process. You can't expect to learn overnight. The old expression, Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to be practice. You have to put the time into it. My dad used to tell me and my brothers when we were growing up, and my sister, if we complained about something that we were trying to learn how to do in school or whatever, he would always say to us, you know what? You get out of something what you put into it. So if you invest the time and the effort, you'll get a lot more out of it than just, kind of treating it like a passing hobby or phase. Same thing with the Mac. You have to practice. You have to sit down and dedicate time. And then you have to persist. You have to persevere. There's going to be moments of frustration. As I jokingly tell my clients, when you feel your blood pressure starting to move towards critical mass, it's time to get up from the computer, walk away, go get yourself a beverage or put on the radio or TV, whatever the case may be, and come back to it when you have a better, perspective, and then have at it again. Don't give up. Don't allow the frustration to become the Waterloo for you. You gotta keep. I jokingly say sometimes that people who learned Windows psychologically bury that experience and kind of forget the pain and torture that we went through to kind of learn Windows. I went from DOS to Windows kicking and screaming. And I still very clearly remember my moments of utter frustration and anger when I was learning I think, I can't remember, what was it, TSI, Power Braille, and then earlier versions of JAWS, and then Voice had Slimware, Window Bridge. So I remember all too clearly that process of learning Windows. So I find it amusing that people seem to forget that, and that they expect the Mac to be this piece of cake that, oh, I'll just wake up tomorrow and I'll be an expert Mac user. And it just doesn't work that way. You got to put the time and effort. Some other basic VoiceOver things to know. As I said earlier, Control Option or Caps Lock and the letter H for the help menu. That has all the main help topics, such as the commands help. Some of the help topics do have their own shortcuts. If you want to learn those keyboard shortcuts, be my guest. For example, Control Option K is the shortcut to get to what's called key describer or keyboard help mode. So if you need help learning your keyboard, you can put it into a mode just like using the insert 1 where your key describer. So you can practice different VoiceOver commands or just learn your modifiers and get used to where the keys are located. And then you can hit escape when you want to close keyboard help. If you're not a great typist, it's a great way also to get comfortable with typing, because the letters and things you press have no effect, just like, any kind of key describer mode, just like the help in iOS. If you do the 4-finger double tap, you can do your gestures and it does no damage to the phone because it's in a simulation or a help mode. So the same thing with Control Option and the letter K. So you can hit escape to close that puppy out. And then, when you need to go back to it, just do that anytime. As I said, also in the help menu, you do have the quick start tutorial. If you want to revisit it there is a keyboard shortcut for that as well. Now, I do want to mention something about the keyboard on a default Mac. The voiceover commands, you'll find that there are some that involve using one of the function keys. In other words, your function key row. So, for example, to open what is called the voiceover utility, you press Control, Option, or Caps Lock and function key 8. Now, with some people, you might have to include the FN key. It is designed so that a sighted user, for example, can press the individual function keys to either lower or raise the brightness level, or to lower or raise or mute the speech. There are, all the function keys do have specific purposes. Now, as a voiceover user, if you do Control Option F8 and nothing happens, or sometimes the music app will open for some reason on some people's systems, you may have to include the FN key. So you would have to actually do FN Control Option F8 or FN Caps Lock F8. If you want to change that, there is a place in System Settings under Keyboard that you can change it so that you don't need the FN key. The problem that this causes, though, is if you need to raise or lower the volume and you want to use F12 or F11, you'll have to include the FN key. If you're sharing the computer with a sighted person who needs to change the brightness, they're going to have to include the FN key. This is one of the reasons why I sort of also recommend to people who are sharing a computer with sighted users to think about having, separate accounts, an account for yourself, an account for the other users. Even if you have 2 or 3 or 4 people sharing that Mac, it's a good idea to have each person have their own account, especially too if you have children, if you're married and have children or whatever. Sometimes having that separate account for the child makes your life easier, because then you can also control what they are able to, to do on the Mac through what's called screen time. If you're an older veteran Mac user, it used to be called parental controls. I guess parental controls got to be a little misleading or offending or whatever to somebody, so they decided to now call it screen time. Control Option Spacebar is how you select items, or it's basically like a left mouse click. So if you want to open an item, if you want to check a checkbox, select the radio button. Control Option or Caps Lock Spacebar is your go-to command in those instances. Just like in Windows, you do find all of those, standard sort of things you'll run into, check boxes, radio buttons, combo boxes, all of that kind of stuff, and dialogues. It's no different. So there is like a save dialogue when you want to save a file, an open dialogue for opening, a file or whatever. So, that kind of stuff is pretty much similar. It's just that how, the dialogues are set up are a little bit different. And I'll kind of get into that a lot more when we talk about Finder, for those of you moving on to the next session, because the save and open dialogues actually have like a mini Finder window that is very easy to use as a voiceover user. If you want to, for example, save your document or your file to a place other than what is default, selected by default by the system. But as I said, that's a little bit more advanced for this particular lesson. Now, the quick start tutorial will kind of introduce you to the terminology. You do want to know the terminology, obviously, of the computer and, your screen reader. That's one thing I always try to emphasize to screen reader users, regardless of whether I'm teaching Mac or Windows. Terminology and things like that a lot better, a lot more in depth than the average sighted person. Not because you want to be a smart aleck and know everything. It's just that we have a different relationship with our technology. A lot of sighted people don't even know what a dialog box is. When you start talking about radio buttons and combo boxes, you might as well be speaking a completely different language to some users. I know sighted people who have no idea what Finder is. Mac users, longtime sighted Mac users, don't know what Finder is, had no idea what Time Machine was. Um, the term URL when you're web browsing, Uniform Resource Locator, which is basically the web address, what an IP address is, things like that. A lot of sighted people have no clue, but it's like almost a second language for those of us who are blind screen reader users in a lot of cases. So you are going to need to learn some terminology as you're working with a Mac. For example, the dock. The dock is visually a strip of icons. It's basically shortcuts that the system has created to all of the most commonly used apps on your Mac. So it's a great way to find Mac's apps on the Mac and launch them.
Wi-Fi.
So Control, Option, and D, like in dock, is how you get to the dock, or caps lock D. And then you can use your VoiceOver navigation to go across the dock and listen to each of the items that are on your dock.
One
Yeah.
thing I want
All
to
right.
point out before you continue, for that caps lock D command to go to the dock, that's probably the best way to do it on the laptop style keyboard, based on the fact that there's not a control key on the right side, and you'd have to cross your hands in order to do that command if you didn't use the command,
Right.
the caps lock D.
Right.
That's the only instance where I actually use the caps lock. Otherwise, I use option control like you do, or option command, whatever it is. Option
Control,
control.
Option.
Yep. Control option.
Don't confuse me, please. I'm very easily confused today. Okay, so like I said, we'll go to the dock here, and you will hear what I have on my dock.
Dock.
Let
Zoom.us.
me go to the top of my dock.
Finder.
Okay, so
Trash. 40 of Finder. Open. 1 of 40.
So
Actions
Finder
available.
is usually the first item that you're going to find in your dock. But as you navigate to the right,
Siri. 2 of 4. Launchpad. Safari. Open. Mail. 14 new item.
System
Contacts. 6 of
Dialog.
calendar.
System
Open
setting.
notes. 8 of reminders.
Version
9 of
8.0.
maps. 10 of
8.0.
photos.
so
11
you'll hear it tells you the number as it is on the dock. So I have 40 items on my dock. Most of you are not going to have. You may have 19, 20, a couple of, maybe 22, whatever. I just have added a lot of stuff to my dock over the years.
Finder open. 1 of 27.
So
Actions
it's
available.
really going to be
You are
different,
currently on
but
an
what you
application
do
dock item.
is you
To open this
control
application,
option
press
space.
Control.
Messages. 2 new items.
Let me
Map room.
go-
No calendar. Contacts. Mail. 14 new items. Open. Safari. Open. 4 of
So I'm
40.
just going to do Safari
Actions available.
here.
Safari. Exercise video.
So I have here for my sister-in-law, I was looking at exercise videos for my nephews.
Close button. Exercise video. Banner.
So just by control
50%
option
loaded.
in space, I opened up Safari when I was on the Safari, icon. So the dock is completely customizable. You can add items to the dock. You can remove items from the dock if you don't want them. Some people like to have a very sparse dock with only specific items on it. Other people like me don't mind having a bunch of things on the dock. So that's entirely up to you. And there may be apps on the dock that are absent from the dock that you want to have. So for example, as a word processor option, which we'll get into in one of the later lessons, text edit is commonly overlooked as a word processor option. Everybody kind of opts for either Pages or Microsoft Word, but text edit is a full-blown word processor
50%
that
loaded.
can
50.
get most things done for people. So, it's not on the
50%
dock by
loaded.
default. So you might want to add it to your dock if you're going to use text edit. So there may be other apps as well that are not on your dock that you might want to have on your dock. So the dock is kind of an important part of Mac life. Some people do everything from the dock, but there are other ways to get to apps. You can get through it through the Finder, which is basically the file management system on the Mac. You can use things like the commanders. Now, the commanders are often overlooked by VoiceOver users.
Zoom.us.
I am a big proponent of using the commanders, particularly the numpad and the keyboard commanders. Now, the numpad commander is only going to be available if you have a full-size keyboard that includes the numeric keypad on the right-hand side. Now, what the numpad commander can do for you is it will take voiceover commands that normally involve multiple key presses and basically make it so you only have to press one key on the numeric keypad. So this will simplify some of your most common voiceover commands. I do find it, as a side note, amusing that sometimes I read things online that say, oh, a voiceover's got all these keyboard commands and there's just too many keys to press. I don't know if they're not using JAWS or they're not paying attention, but there are a lot of JAWS commands that involve just as many key presses as VoiceOver does. Here's the dirty little secret. A screen reader is a keyboard driven system for the most part here. So you are going to be using combinations of keys. So that is just a reality that you can't really escape. Yes, there is Trackpad Commander. Some people may have heard of that. If you are a competent and comfortable iOS user, it is possible on a Mac, like a laptop that has the glass multi-touch trackpad, or if you purchase a trackpad to use with an iMac or a Mac Mini, you can get away with using some of the iPhone gestures. In fact, you could probably do most things and even customize the trackpad commander. It's just, to me, not the way. I don't know. It's maybe just me being old school and an old dog who just doesn't want to learn a lot of new tricks, but I just rather stick to using the keyboard. It's just easier in a lot of cases than having to deal with trackpad gestures. But that's to the individual user to decide. Commanders, the numpad commander, keyboard commander are the two ways that you can really simplify your voiceover use. I particularly use the keyboard commander as a quick and easy way to launch applications. So in other words, with the keyboard commander by default, what it does is you hold down either the right option key or the left option key with a letter, a shifted letter, or a number from the number row. And you can configure what you want that shortcut to do. So for example, by default, Apple offers right option is the default. Right option M will open Mail. Right option S will launch Safari. So I have added keyboard commands such as right option P to launch Pages, right option N to launch the Numbers, which is their Apple version of Excel. Right option capital M, shifted M will launch Music. Right option shifted S, capital S for me will open System Settings. So I've configured or programmed my keyboard commander to act as a nice little poor man's way to launch apps for myself. And my numpad commander I use to simplify some of the common voiceover things like interaction, which I'm going to talk about here momentarily. For example, to start and stop interacting, going to the window chooser menu, the application chooser menu, calling up the web item rotor. These are terms that you'll learn as you become a more proficient voiceover user. But those types of things I can do from the numeric keypad. And that's the beauty of it. And it gets overlooked by so many users, but it's one of the reasons why I recommend having a full-size keyboard of some kind that does include the 10-key numeric keypad. Okay, interaction. I'm not going to get like totally crazy here because it's probably more advanced stuff because I want to get into the Q&A here, but interaction is an important term to know for voiceover. It's basically drilling down or taking a closer look at a part of the interface of an application. So with VoiceOver, the way Apple works it with the Mac is screens are often sort of subdivided or sandboxed into little areas that allow a blind person to know what belongs to what. So for example, Finder, as I said, is the file management system on the Mac. When you open a Finder window, The sighted user sees three main parts to the screen: the toolbar that runs across the top of the screen, the sidebar that is on the left-hand side of the screen, and the browser side is the right-hand side. Now, you have to interact with one of those three areas to be able to know what is being included in them. So in other words, if you want to navigate your files and your folders, you have to interact with the browser side, and then you can see what's in your applications folder, what's in your home folder, etc. You have to interact with the toolbar if you want to select any of the items on the toolbar. Now, as a screen reader user, keep in mind that the menus do contain things, keyboard shortcuts that enable you not to even have to bother with the toolbar in most apps, not all, but most applications. So interaction is going to be a common part of your VoiceOver life. And it's either Control Option Shift down arrow or Caps Lock Shift down arrow to start interacting with an item, and Shift Control Option or Shift Caps Lock up arrow to stop interacting with an item. You can, again, as I said, with the numpad commander, for example, for me, I have plus and minus on my numeric keypad to start and stop interacting with items, so I don't have to press all of those keys. Now, the thing about interaction, again, I really can't get into too much detail here, but the thing I'm going to stress to you is listen to the VoiceOver hints. I know people want to shut VoiceOver up instantaneously the moment it starts to talk, but those hints can give you a really good idea when you have to interact with something and when it is not necessary. There is rhyme or reason to interaction. There is specific elements, like browsers, tables or sidebars, toolbars, scroll areas, web content. So there are specific types of things that you have to, as a Mac and VoiceOver user, you'll get used to understanding that require interaction for you to be able to navigate them and not to overcomplicate things. But in some instances, you may be interacting multiple levels down within an interface. So in other words, within a scroll area, there may be a table, so you have to pay attention to the VoiceOver hints. If you want to shut up VoiceOver, by the way, at any point, you simply hold the control key down for a moment. Don't press it repeatedly because it acts like a pause and resume. So some people get into this, they go crazy.
Zoom share toolbar.
And that's what you get. So you just press it when it's talking.
Window system dialog. More menu item.
It stops it from speaking. So that's all you have to do is just hold it for a moment and it will stop speaking. So that's the beauty of using the control key. But with that being said, just remember that those hints can be lifesavers to you and allow you to know what you have to do in a given area. So a couple of other things before we wrap things up and move into Q&A here. Control Option in the letter M is the equivalent of the Alt key in the Windows world. It takes you to an application's menu bar. So File, Edit, View, you have the same sort of principle in the Mac world. The big difference there, though, is you always start off on what is called the Apple menu. So when you do Control Option M, regardless of what application you're currently in at the time, you will always hear VoiceOver say,
Menu bar, Apple.
That's where you're always going to start. So what happens is directly to the right of the Apple menu.
Zoom.us.
It's always going to be the application name. In other words, I'm in Zoom, so it's the Zoom menu. If I was in Finder, it would be the menu. If I was in Safari, it would be in the Safari.
Your internet connection is unstable. Zoom.us.
I don't know how that's possible on a 1 gig Verizon network, but whatever. So that's the thing to remember, that to the right. Now, the Apple menu is going to contain like really important system stuff. So I'm just going to go down the Apple menu for a moment to point a couple of things out.
Apple menu.
About this Mac is an important thing to know. If you're ever on the phone with an Apple tech person, they're going to ask you for your serial number and some other identifying information about your Mac. You're going to find it in the About This Mac screen. As long as you use your VoiceOver arrow keys to navigate it, whatever they ask you, you should find in that screen. This is
System
a
settings
shortcut to
ellipsis.
get into the system settings. This is like your control panel for the Mac itself, which again is way more advanced than this particular lesson we're going to cover. But system settings is definitely something you want to be familiar with. And then you have App Store, shortcut, recent items for things
submenu.
that you've opened if you want quick access to things that you've opened.
Force quit ellipsis command option escape.
The sleep,
restart ellipsis,
and
shutdown ellipsis
options are all in the Apple menu. Now, as I said, as you go to the right,
menu bar zoom.us,
you'll find
meeting, view, edit, window.
So as you go to the right, you're going to find, just like you would do on any standard menu based on the application, all your different options.
System settings.
You can go down.
Edit. View. View. Show manage. Show chat command. Hide video panel. Hide floating meeting control. Show manage participant.
So, as you go down the menu, you're obviously going to hear your menu options and such. Now, there is a secondary menu on the Mac called the status menu or menu extras. This visually is on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, if the way you get there, and I'm just going to escape out of here. If you do the menu command 2 quick times, Control Option M.
Time machine status menu.
So you'll be in the status menus. Now, this will range based on your computer setup. I have some things in here that are
search, control center, Siri, Tuesday, October, audio and video controls, zoom.us, status menu, group.
So it's going to be based on what you have. Now, the thing to remember about the status menu that is a little bit different from the regular menus, you have to use the VoiceOver navigation keys, the up and down, the VoiceOver left and right, VoiceOver up and down arrows. You can't use the regular arrow keys. They don't work in the status menus. Also, you have to activate a status menu first in order to actually navigate it. In other words, you can't just VO down. So let me just get out of here.
Safari, zoom.
So on the regular menu bar,
Apple.
All I did was VO down arrow.
Apple menu about this Mac. System settings ellipsis.
I didn't have to VO space to activate that menu.
Menu application help in settings. OneDrive. Zoom.us. Zoom share tool.
Yeah, this is a bug that they still have not fixed in Sonoma, where certain apps will trigger if your focus is on that app in the status menu, it automatically pops the application. So OneDrive is in my status menu, and when I went there, it just popped the OneDrive window. But typically, you would have to do VO spacebar or either Control Option or Caps Lock spacebar to activate the menu itself, and then you can navigate it. So that's the big difference between the regular standard menu bar and the status menus, or it's called menu extras. Sometimes some Mac users call it the extended menu because it's kind of extended to the right. So that's terminology, whatever. It's whatever you want to call it, I guess, as long as you know what it is. That's the to me, the most important thing. Now, the Mac possesses, just like in the Windows world, you do have all your major applications. You can do email. The Apple Mail application is completely accessible. I will be speaking about the Apple Mail application in detail in a later lesson. You don't have to use the web interface for Gmail or Yahoo. You don't have to use Outlook. For some reason, people get either they're told or they just think that, oh, I have an Outlook account, so I have to use Outlook, or my work requires that I use Outlook. Apple Mail handles what's called the EWS, the Exchange Web Service. So you can configure an Outlook account to work in Apple Mail. I do. I have an Outlook account that runs in my Apple Mail. In fact, I have 7 different accounts. iCloud, I have my cable provider, I have a Gmail account, I have an old Yahoo account going back many years I use for fantasy sports. So I have 7 different accounts that run in Apple Mail. It's a completely robust and totally accessible mail client that is very easy to manage from the VoiceOver perspective. Safari is the web browser. There is, of course, Google Chrome, Firefox, Brave, but Safari is the default web browser. It is how I teach web browsing to students. If you want to use something different, basically all of the VoiceOver basics for navigation and so forth will work in, whatever web browser you decide to use for the most part. Some things are Safari specific, but, by and large, the navigation and stuff should work regardless of what browser you choose. And obviously the Mac is different from Windows. You do have to keep in mind that not all websites are accessible. There's nothing special if you're using Windows or Mac. If a website is not developed accessibly, if there's not alt tags included, etc., you're not going to have any better luck on the Windows side compared to the Mac side, regardless of though some people like to say otherwise and say that, JAWS does a better job, etc. If it's not accessible, it's not accessible. It's just the reality. As somebody who actually web tests for a certain, I can't really get into details, but I do professionally web test for a company and have to report back my findings when they give me a specific website. And I can tell you, I got to do it on both Windows and Mac, and there is no difference in what you find. If it's not accessible, it's not accessible. Now, word processing, I said about text edit as the basic word processor. It is not WordPad or Notepad.
Your internet connection isn't stable.
So
Zoom.us.
don't feel that text edit is like a cheap word processor. It is a full-blown word processor. It just doesn't have all of the bells and whistles that Pages and Microsoft Word contain. But if you need something with more kick, I would definitely go with Pages over Word, only because Pages is more accessible in the grand scheme of things, and it also allows you to export into Microsoft Word should you need to have DOX formatted documents to submit to school, or if it's a work related thing. If you need to use Word is accessible with VoiceOver. I'm not trying to say it's not. It's just that Pages is a little bit more straightforward, in my humble opinion, as a user than Word. But I've had other people tell me who've come over from Word for Windows. They're used to Word for Windows. They just know how it works. And it's just a matter of learning different keyboard commands, but Word pretty much behaves and acts in a fairly similar manner than it does on a PC. So if that's your game and you like Word, then by all means, use it. You do have a calendar app on the Mac. It's not, it's related. If you're using iCloud, all of your apps tie together, and that is one of the things I do recommend. I know some people get a little nervous or about using, oh, you can get hacked, your ID stolen, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you're always going to take a chance. I mean, I'm not going to say anything is foolproof and system proof, etc. But iCloud is very, very secure. I've been using it since it's been available. Remember that your account is only as strong as the password. And the reason why I bring this up is every once in a while I get a client that will immediately point out to me some story in the news about some celebrity's iCloud account being hacked and their nude photos or compromising photos were made available to the world, etc., etc. When you read into those stories, what you find out is that the password that was being used by said celebrity was very easily guessed by a knowledgeable fan. So again, as one of my men has said to me numerous times, your account is only as strong as your password. So if you have a strong, unpredictable password and you're not using password 7 or Spaceballs 1 2 3 4 5, you should be fine as long as you're a little creative with your password. So your iCloud account will allow you to sync your contacts, your calendars, your Safari bookmarks, mail settings, even VoiceOver settings now across Macs and such, and iDevices can be shared via an iCloud account. So I highly recommend, I also highly recommend using desktop and documents in the cloud. You get 5 gigabytes for free, which I wish Apple would jack up a little bit to be a little bit more reasonable in modern times. But even purchasing subscriptions for additional iCloud space is not going to kill the average person. I think it's like 99 cents a month for 20 gigabytes, maybe $2.99 for 200, etc. And it's worth it. For me, because I travel, I go to my brother's from place access to all of my business files because they're in iCloud. So it doesn't matter what Mac I'm on. I always have access to all of my business files, some of my personal stuff that I want to have easy access to, my music, etc. The photos that for some reason, as the blind guy in the family, I have been, for whatever the reason, elected as the photo keeper, master, or whatever of my family. Everybody sends me the photos from events, and I'm supposed to organize them and keep track of them on my computer, even though I can't see them, but I still am, still my responsibility. So I use iCloud for that as well.
Authentication. Application.
So my point is, you definitely want to consider using iCloud in the grand scheme of things, and don't get, scared off by, the people who say that cloud services are bad and evil and all that stuff. And I'm not saying all are safe and secure, but certainly Apple takes pride in privacy and security and really goes out of their way a lot more. And I can say this without, I'm not bashing, quote unquote, anybody, but Apple certainly takes privacy and security a lot more seriously than other major companies in the tech world do, particularly Google and Facebook. And that's not conjecture. That if you have any mind to go out there and read stuff out there, you will find out that Google and Facebook are really, really bad about security in terms of selling your information to advertisers and using your information to their advantage. Where Apple, things are machine specific. Apple does not maintain a lot of your personal data, and if there is anything that Apple needs to have from you, they ask for your permission. So again, comes back to what I said earlier during the setup assistant. Always read dialogues, including iOS. You want to know what you're being asked. Don't just agree to something or say no to something simply because, I'm just going to say no. You got to read what they're actually asking you, because sometimes it's really important to say yes or okay. So that's just another piece of advice as a longtime computer user. We talked about how to shut down your Mac, how to restart your Mac. You can do that from the Apple menu. There are keyboard shortcuts that you can also utilize. I don't expect people to remember this stuff now, but for example, Control-Option-Command F12 will shut down the Mac. Control-Command F12 will restart the Mac. So my point being that there are keyboard shortcuts that you can use if you want to bypass having to go through the menus. Now, another couple of other little things to remember about your Mac is, by default, when you quit an application. Now, quitting an application, kind of like Alt F4 in the Windows world, and the Mac world, it is Command and the letter Q, like in quit. Quitting an application sends the application away, including its open windows at the time. So if you were web browsing and you were doing comparison shopping for the upcoming holidays, and you had, Walmart and Amazon and whatever open, when you restart Safari the next time, by default, it will reopen the windows that you last had open, unless you've closed them before you quit the application. Now, closing a window is Command W, like in window. The Command key, again, is like your Alt key in the Windows world. Now, closing a window does not close the app. Remember, Command Q quits the app. Closing the window still leaves the application open. So if, for example, if you were doing comparison web shopping, you could close the Amazon window, but the Walmart window would still be open, or Safari would be open, but there would be no open windows at that moment. So that's just some terminology and functionality to be aware of the difference between quitting an application and closing windows. And there are some keyboard shortcuts that allow you to close all the windows simultaneously. You can quit an application and force its windows to completely close.
Your internet connection isn't stable.
Has Zoom.us.
But I don't want to get too crazy about keyboard shortcuts, but I just want to let you know that there are various keyboard shortcuts in the Mac world. Now, on that subject matter, VoiceOver key, Mac OS keyboard, 2-speed. People think, just like Windows users think, that everything is JAWS, 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 and they don't realize that there are several hundred Windows keyboard commands built into the system. The same thing with the Mac. You have VoiceOver slew of commands that you'll see in the help menu under the commands help, but there are also a whole bunch of Mac OS commands. And when I teach people, I kind of integrate both, because sometimes there are Mac OS commands that there are no equivalent in the VoiceOver world, or sometimes the Mac OS command is actually overlapped with the VoiceOver command, but it's easier because it's less keys and less to remember. So I kind of integrate worlds when I am, teaching people. So when you quit your Mac, when you totally shut it down or restart, just like the applications will remember the windows that are open, by default, if you leave Mail open, for example, and you shut down your Mac or you restart it, the next time it reboots, Mail is going to open. So it can work to your advantage. I love to do that. I love to keep Mail open. I love to keep TextEdit, my calendar. So when I restart my Mac for a system update or something like that, I always get the same applications and thus the same windows to reopen at the same time. If you don't like, if that makes you feel a little, you don't want it to be that way, again, ways so that sections. In other words, your Mac restarts with a clean slate. Nothing is open at any time. So you can do that. I just want, people to be aware you have customization options. All right. I think that pretty much covers the basics. I can't think of anything that I've left off without getting into more advanced territory here. But again, there's a lot of material online, including my website and others out there, that is stuff for free. Some stuff is, but you can get a lot of help. This is one of the quote unquote Mac pioneers back in 2000, where we were just kind of learning as we went along. There are a lot of resources out there. I have on my website links to several others. Cliff at the end is going to give his credentials and places for you guys to go to get material to help you as well. So my point is that, again, contrary to some of the myths out there is a lot of places you can get some beginner help and get you up and running. And obviously you can contact me or Cliff privately if you want some additional help as well, or advice. I didn't get into the whole realm of talking about what Mac to buy, because that can get into the whole world itself. But if you want any advice on that, again, you can contact me or Cliff outside of, and we'll gladly answer any questions as to what, basically what would fit your needs. So I'm going to open the floor to Q&A. And
would it be okay? This probably isn't a beginner question, but you touched on it today about your number pad commanders. Would you, could you tell me what you do on your number pad commanders? Did you make any of them different than what they are?
Yes.
I'm just curious what you do.
Yeah, I changed because 7 and 9 are usually the interaction and stop interacting. I moved it to the plus and minus because it's on the end of the new numpad. It just, to me, plus you're interacting, minus you stop interacting. And I moved, choose menu, and the web item rotor to 7 and 9. I left the navigation cross, the 2 and 8, the 4 and 6, and the
Uh-huh.
5 as you select. I left that, but everything else is kind of changed. And
in a previous life, I could zoom my Mac screen by just Alt Command and the plus or minus key, and it would zoom up or zoom down. I'm low vision. I'm not blind. I'm very low vision. The latest update, I'm finding that command combo does not work to quickly be able to zoom the screen or zoom back down. Did you address that today? And is there something?
no,
Is there a new?
you might want to look at accessibility settings under Zoom, and it's possible they changed the keyboard for some reason. I haven't looked.
Okay.
I haven't worked with a low vision person in Sonoma yet, so I haven't had I haven't had anybody ask me to do that yet.
All right, I'll go into Zoom. I confess, I haven't gone into the Zoom settings.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be there if they changed it for some reason.
I've been using Windows for years, and surely I press like insert F4 or Alt F4 and all that stuff using NVDA or JAWS. And I was trying to press like, I like Control plus option and any other like VoiceOver H, VoiceOver, let's say VoiceOver modifier could be Control plus option. And sometimes I cannot like, how would you recommend to press like all together, all keys together, all modifiers should be pressed first, or because sometimes it doesn't work, although I don't have any problems with my fingers or with my moves, how would you recommend to do that?
The way I always suggest it to my beginners is always get the modifier keys down first. Make sure you're holding down whatever the requirement is, and then tap the additional letter. So for example, if you're doing Control Option H for the help menu, just hold down Control Option, make sure they're down, and then just tap the letter H while keeping the modifiers down. Getting the modifier keys down first, to me, is really important because that's where people can go awry. And if they're leaving out a modifier, they can end up doing a keyboard command entirely different than they were trying to. I always try to emphasize the importance of holding down those modifiers first. Which is again why I go, to the numpad commander for some of those keys that require gymnastics with the fingers.
And I recommend, I don't care how long you've been using the Mac, but I recommend every time a new operating system, like we're on Sonoma now, that you go through that quick start tutorial guide because they're always adding new stuff in there. I go through it yearly to see what they've added. They've always sneaking quick tips and hints in there, and they don't tell you that. But when you go through it and you find new stuff, it's a good thing to do every time a new OS comes out.
Yeah, it's the first thing I do when I beta test, just to see if they've done anything, and I look at the help menu too, and because you never know if they've changed anything.
This is a question of Mac versus Windows. And it's not anything specific, but general. I have a real problem on my Mac. I'm an engineer and had a real problem navigating spreadsheets, whether Excel or numbers, just with running VoiceOver. It was just, I'd get lost in the sheet. I'd bring the same sheet up on my PC running Zoom text. And, because I'm low vision, I'm not blind. And I think that makes a big difference. I could just flip around spreadsheets, create spreadsheets. It was just, I had a life where I came out of Windows, and I'm trying to commit to Apple, but I've decided I have to live a dual life. There are just certain things where Windows, maybe it's just because my brain is hardwired now, I can do efficiently, whereas on the Mac running VoiceOver, I'll get so lost in Excel in VoiceOver, I get frustrated. Let's leave it at that.
Well, numbers, I guess, there's keyboard shortcuts and stuff for all of that stuff. So I don't know, I can't sit here and kind of come up with and tell you quick ways to get around spreadsheets, especially since you're low vision and you're not necessarily using keyboard shortcuts. But, you know, I'm not a big spreadsheet user on either of the operating systems. I kind of disdain spreadsheets personally. I mean, I use them. I have to use them for my accounting when I turn in stuff from my accountant every quarter. She wants certain things in spreadsheets, but it's not, and I teach it to people when I have to, but it's not something I spend more time in than I need to. So thank you very much to everybody for attending. I appreciate your time. And I will speak to hopefully most of you guys in 2 weeks.
Remember, for all Mac, iOS, and any kind of Apple training, visit macfortheblind.com. John Panarese has some free courses and some reasonable paid courses. You won't be disappointed. See you next time.